So I'm going to call Marc up. He's, let's give him a hand. He's the head honcho at Choices Pregnancy Center, and you've heard me talk about it. Remember back in our old facility, we used to collect coins for the baby bottles, okay? This is the organization we were taking those baby bottles with coins filled with. And then, we have our own in-house Denise, right, who also is part of Choices. And so Marc and I have been, kind of working on a schedule since last year. And so finally I said, you give me a date that'll work and we'll make it happen. And so I didn't want to miss this because you guys all heard that story. And those of you that are new, 51 years ago, my mom was on her way to an abortion clinic, okay? And my dad stopped her, right? And he sang the MC Hammer song, Can't Touch This, okay? 51 years ago, if my mom went through that abortion, I wouldn't be here today. And I'm still upset about Prop 139 passing, okay? In the United States, and I'm sure he'll give you facts on all the numbers, the United States alone has killed millions and millions and millions of babies. And I wonder how many doctors, nurses, lawyers, in and out hamburger flippers there are, but then they've been aborted, right? And so I'm super excited for Marc to be here. Afterwards, I'll come back up and I'll share some thoughts along in line with what he's going to share. And then we'll do communion. And then there's a resource table that you guys can visit in the back. Go say hi. And then if you have any questions, go there and then we'll have communion and all that good stuff and we'll dismiss. Get it? All right, let's give him a hand one more time.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. I'm assuming you can hear me? All right. Before we dive into some pretty heavy stuff today, I was talking with Pastor Mike. I travel to a lot of churches. I talk a lot. I've never seen a lead pastor come out, play guitar, and sing like he did just now. That does not happen. So I was giving him kudos for that. That was pretty impressive. So thank you. Anytime we get an opportunity, or I get an opportunity to present at a church, we understand it's a great privilege, it's an honor, and we treat it as such. Okay, my time up here this morning is I want to give you some new information. Maybe it's going to be a review for some of you, but at the very least, I want you to leave here today having a deeper understanding of the issue. Yes, we're going to talk about abortion. It can be very volatile, polarizing, but we're also going to talk about how do we actually understand this issue? Not the procedure itself, but what is the very essence of this issue? And how do we as the body of believers, Christ followers, how should we appropriately respond to this issue, right? The last thing we're going to talk about today is what does success look like in this space? And I will hammer this home. I talk with a lot of people all the time. I interview a lot of people. And I ask them all the time, individually, I need you to define success for me when it comes to the abortion issue. And I ask that question every time because I promise you we are not all rowing in the same direction. There's a spectrum of answers and solutions when it comes to this abortion issue. And so today, I'm going to walk you through all of those things. I'm going to tell you how at Choices we approach the issue. I don't want you to leave here thinking, well, this guy wants me to believe what he believes and approach it. No. At the end of the day, what you're going to see is how we approach the issue is to point everybody back to Jesus, plain and simple. It is really that simple. Okay? So we're going to dive in. We're going to hit some heavy stuff. And I want to set expectation. Because the very first time I did this presentation, I got some feedback afterwards. Before I jump in and tell you about Choices, I have to set a foundation for where we're at today. All of you know Proposition 139 is passed, okay? And so what we're going to do today is I'm going to tell you all the things about 139 that some of you may know or not know, but then I'm also going to tell you the fallout from 139, okay? So let's go ahead and jump right in. To understand where we're at today, we have to go back in time to 1973. 1973, the Supreme Court of the United States heard the Roe v. Wade case. Okay, they made a decision that you and I both know as Roe. It was the law. Put, here's what Roe stated. Abortions were allowed. First trimester. Trimester, most abortions were allowed. Third trimester, not many abortions unless it was endangering the life of the mother. That was basically Roe for 50 years, and you heard everybody say it was the law of the land. I put that in air quotes on purpose. When I talk about Roe, it's important that we do a quick civics lesson. If in 1973, one governor had stood up and said, yeah, we understand what the Supreme Court just said, but we think that's morally reprehensible, we're not going to do that in our own state. If one governor would have done that, I promise you another would have stood up, and another would have stood up. Wouldn't have been everybody, but it would have been something. And we wouldn't have seen 64,700,000 babies die as a result of Roe, because that's what happened. And it's a good reminder for each of us what our role, responsibility, and rights are when we're faced with morally reprehensible things like that. But let's fast forward to 2022. The same Supreme Court heard the Dobbs case. I'm not going to go into all the details, it doesn't matter. Suffice to say, Justice Alito made a decision. His opinion was, hey, you know what? I don't think the Supreme Court has the right to determine when life begins. He was right. They don't. And then it went back down to the states. And all of that culminated in November of last year with Proposition 139 here in Arizona. By show of hands, in November of last year when you went to vote, were you aware of Proposition 139? Okay, just about everybody in the room, which is fantastic. Here's my next question. When you went to vote, do you believe you fully understand everything about 139? Raise your hand. Denise, that's cheating. Okay, we've got a few hands. Here's the reality of why that is. The organization that pushed Proposition 139 was able to generate and spend $33 million on the campaign. That is an astronomical amount of money for a local proposition race. And what happened? We had commercials everywhere, right? We had pamphlets, flyers everywhere. I couldn't go anywhere the months leading up to the election on a weekend without being met by somebody saying, hey, will you sign a petition saying you're going to vote yes for 139? It was everywhere. And objectively speaking, most of the content that was put out was patently false. Now, I worked with an organization that was trying to counter that, an organization called It Goes Too Far. We were able to generate $2 million, which is a fantastic amount of money, but it's nothing compared to $33 million. So 139 has passed. And so I think it's up on the screen here. I'm going to walk you through what 139 encapsulates, what you were told it encapsulates. The first part is what we call the legal, okay? 139 states very clearly that now abortion is now codified in the Arizona State Constitution as an Arizona constitutionally protected state right up to the point of fetal viability. That's how it's written. Most people read up to that point and they go, okay, this is another one of those common sense abortion laws, like a 15-week ban. So they went ahead and they signed off on it. But you have to go to the next part, which is what I call the switch, which is the bait and switch. The next part states that a healthcare professional can make a determination that that pregnancy is causing mental, physical, or emotional harm to that mother and that an abortion is essential and necessary. Here's the kicker. Through all 9 months of pregnancy. We just nullified the first part, but nobody read that far down. Notice I didn't say doctor, I didn't say physician, I said healthcare professional. That's by design. That can be a podiatrist, a chiropractor, a dermatologist. That can be anybody. The last part is the lawfare component. This is really important. 139 states that local law enforcement, i.e. government, cannot interfere in those abortions taking place. That's really important because abortionists need that legal cover. They don't want to get sued, they don't want to lose their license, and they don't want to go to jail. Now that's what you were told about 139, the general populace was told. Now I want to share with you the fallout of 139, all the things that you were not told. I've broken it down into 3 parts again. The first part is what I call the pill, which is short for the abortion pill. I'm going to ask for a show of hands. How many of you here have heard of the abortion pill? Okay, fantastic. This is not the morning after pill, Plan B. That's not what this is. The abortion pill is very important. It accounts for 63% of all abortions in the country today. It is every bit a paradigm shift inside the abortion industry. And it's really easy for us to see Planned Parenthood and abortion facilities ratcheting down days of operations, even closing their centers. There's talks of them being defunded. And it's very easy for us to go, oh, this is awesome. Our side is winning. Well, yes and no. It's just transitioning from brick and mortar to the pill. This is what's happening today. I won't go into all the details, but here's the problem with the abortion pill. The abortion pill is promoted to young women, and I'm going to quote Planned Parenthood's website. This is what they tell women who take the abortion pill. It's a 2-pill process. And mind you, this physically causes an abortion. Here's what they tell young women. Take a couple of days off of work, get a heating pad, some Tylenol, some ibuprofen. You're going to have some cramping and bleeding. That's it. Now think about what I just said to you. Nowhere in there, these individuals who claim they're all about women's health, nowhere in there they tell that young woman, for your own safety, you need to go get an ultrasound. Because you need to know how far along you are, because if you're too far along, those pills aren't going to work. And you also need an ultrasound to verify the pregnancy. Because if you're having an ectopic pregnancy, that's any pregnancy outside the uterus, if you don't go to the ER, you will have complications that will likely take your life. Now, most women, when they take the abortion pill, it's at home, alone, in their dormitory. They haven't told anybody, so they're taking these in private. And because they're being told they don't need to go see a physician, complications arise. And I forgot to mention the most insidious part. When the abortion pill is actually doing what it's supposed to be doing, they tell these young women you're going to experience cramping and bleeding. If she's having life-altering complications from an ectopic pregnancy, do you want to guess what the symptoms are? They're indistinguishable. It's cramping and bleeding. But she doesn't know any different because she hasn't gone to see a doctor. This is going to skyrocket in the state of Arizona. The abortion pill is going to explode. Even though it's illegal to get today, that's going to change. And I will make a bold prediction right now. I think we're going to live long enough, unless something changes, we're going to see the abortion pill being administered by school nurses on school campuses, high schools, and universities. That's going to happen. Now, the next thing from the fallout is what I call trafficking. That's human trafficking. Remember what 139 stated. Any healthcare professional can make a determination that abortion is necessary. Law enforcement is prohibited in stopping. So what did we just do? We just created a revolving door magnet, get-out-of-jail-free card for individuals who traffic young women who often get pregnant because of what they're forced to do to come to the state of Arizona and get abortions. That's going to skyrocket. And I'm going to tell you right now, the next thing that the governor and the attorney general is going to come after is parental consent. They're going to get rid of that. And that's going to make this even worse. That's what's going to explode as a result of 139. The last component is what I call the government component. I just mentioned our governor and our attorney general. They don't like pregnancy resource groups like Choices. In March of last year, it's been 1 year already, the Attorney General's Reproductive Rights Unit put out a consumer alert warning people to stay away from places like Choices Pregnancy Centers. She said, we lie, we coerce, we manipulate, we use false advertising, we have nobody medical, we're all led by volunteers. All of them blatant lies. They even put a phone number at the end to call in on what you think might be a bogus pregnancy resource center. My favorite part is they even put in there that some of these organizations even use the word choice in their name. This is they're going to ratchet and ratchet and ratchet and make it harder and harder and harder for places like Choices to stay in business. We know this is going to happen because we've seen it happening in other states across the nation where similar propositions have passed. Now, I've just painted a really bleak picture for you. Pastor Mike said he's talked about this quite a bit. I will tell you, it's okay to be frustrated about where we're at. You should be disgusted and horrified because it's horrifying and it's disgusting. But we can't stick our heads in the sand and pretend this isn't the case. This is the reality that we're faced with. This is our baseline and our foundation from which to build. And so now the good news. Let me introduce you to an organization called Choices. Choices, very simply, is Arizona's largest, longest-running, pro-life, Christ-centered pregnancy resource group. We've been in operation since 1983. We've been able to serve about 280,000 clients. And through that work, we've been able to save the lives of about 10,000 babies. And we are also unapologetically Christ-centered. And through that, we've been able to see 2,500 plus people come to accept Christ inside of our centers today. We are a ministry that happens to offer pregnancy-related care. And we operate on a mission field not necessarily created by abortion, although our mission statement says that. We actually operate in the mission field created by, oh no, I think I might be pregnant. There's a big difference between the two, but that's where we operate today. We offer an array of services to our clients coming in. Free pregnancy tests, free ultrasounds. In fact, we've administered over 80,000 free ultrasounds. We are 100% donor funded. We take zero federal dollars. We provide options counseling, which includes conversations about adoption. We have an array of education classes, nurse-led classes on everything from nursing, pregnancy, delivery, to parenting education programs. That can be vocational, that could be how to be a mom, how to be a dad. Just a year and a half ago, we launched our men's fatherhood program. And as our clients take these classes, they accumulate points. Points they can redeem for cash inside of each of our centers, because in each of our centers, we have these beautiful storefronts that we call boutiques. And inside these boutiques are everything from formula, wipes, diapers, cribs, car seats, and everything in between. They can take those points and redeem them for cash and get all those items for free. That's what we do here at Choices. And so, as we talk about the issue of abortion, before I came to Choices, it's been 10 years now. I was on the board of directors, and now I've been in this role for 6. I spent about 25 years in marketing, advertising, creative, venture capital work, startups, that whole universe. And as a result of living in that world, you have to get really good at taking really complicated business ideas and making them really consolidated down to its very essence, because venture capitalists have really short attention spans. And for years, I've grappled with what is the abortion issue at its very core, at its very essence. I'm not talking about the procedure, I'm talking about the issue itself. It's complicated. And if we cannot succinctly distill it down to its very essence, we cannot form a plan of attack against it, can we? And so I put together a visual representation for you, because I'm very visual, of what we see the abortion issue really being. And it's here that I always use my visual prop. All of us have a worldview. From agnostic, atheist, to Christ follower, we have a worldview. This is my biblical worldview filter, right? I assume all of you in here have a biblical worldview. Everything that I view around me is through this biblical filter, from creation to sexuality to marriage to the sanctity of human life. All of it goes through this biblical worldview. And I wear these in here to hammer it home. If we do not look at the abortion issue through a biblical worldview, we will miss the point entirely. But when we do, we see at its very essence, it is a spiritual heart issue. Now stay with me for a second. You and I don't see it play out in popular culture that way, do we? This is how we see it play out in popular culture. This next slide here. We see it play out as a political issue, yes? We just went through a really tumultuous political season. We see it play out as politics all the time. We see it play out as a healthcare issue. We're told all the time that abortion is a healthcare service to these women. A community failure issue. I want to keep this baby, but there's nobody in my life to help me. From friends to family to coworkers to church, there's nothing. Socioeconomic, same thing. We see it as a choice issue, right? It's her body, it's her choice. We've heard that ad nauseum. It's a rights issue. It's her right to choose. It's an upward mobility issue. I want to keep this baby, but you know what? I just started this new job. I've got this new career. I just can't do this right now. It's just not the right time for me. This is how we see this play out in popular culture. And for each one of these that we created, we could create an infinite number more. And if you're ever wondering why this issue seems so difficult to wrap your arms around, why it's so polarizing, why it causes so much hate, anger, and frustration among people, this is why. It is incredibly complicated and nuanced by design. Now, since we know what it is, we know that it's a spiritual heart issue, the question should become to each of us, okay, so how do we respond to this issue? What does this even look like? Let's talk brass tacks for a moment. The answer, like everything else, should be found and is found in Scripture. There is a beautiful representation of how we at Choices approach this issue. It's found in John chapter 8. You all know the story. It's the lady caught in the act of adultery brought to Jesus. Backstory, the religious leaders, you know the story. They hate him. They're trying to catch him in a gotcha moment. Because Mosaic law says that this woman needs to be stoned. Roman occupation law says you can't do that. So what's Jesus' answer going to be? I was reading commentary on this, and they speculate that this woman most likely had no clothes on when she was brought before Jesus. Do you remember what Jesus did when this woman was brought to him? He knelt down on the ground and started drawing in the sand. They think that's probably why. But what answer does Jesus give? He gives the Son of God answer, if you will, that even further proves out his deity. He says, okay, which of you is without sin? You pick up and cast the first stone. One by one, oldest to youngest, they all walk away and leave. Jesus then stands up, addresses the woman, and says, so where are all of your accusers? Where have they gone? Well, she says they're all gone. And it's here we get to the crux of it. What does Jesus say to this woman? He says, well, then I don't condemn you either. That's the grace component. But what else does he say? Go now and leave your life of sin. That's the truth component. So you ask, how do we approach this issue? This is how we do it at Choices. It's equal parts grace and it's equal parts truth. It's not our job to bring in a client at Choices, lock the door, point the finger, and berate them for an hour and a half on how did you get here today and how could you possibly contemplate having an abortion. That's not going to work. Would Jesus do that? No, he would provide grace, not all grace because it's out of balance. He wouldn't do all truth because it becomes legalistic. It's equal parts grace and it's equal parts truth, and it's all about tone. How do we talk to this individual? And nowhere is this on greater display at Choices than inside of our post-abortive recovery program. We have women coming to us all the time that have gone through the pain and loss of an abortion. Is our response as an organization to go, hey, I'm so sorry you made that decision. You're not welcome here. Go find help someplace else. Now, I bring this up because I have people come up to me all the time saying, I cannot believe you provide support for somebody who's had an abortion, to which I respond, I can't believe that you think we wouldn't. When you come to Choices and you've gone through that experience, here's how the process works. It's completely confidential, and you only engage and interact with other women who have been through what you've experienced. The most important thing about the process, though, is that we don't give them some secular psychobabble on how to get through this. Instead, everything is redemption in Jesus, forgiveness in Jesus, new identity in Jesus, and a new life in Jesus, so that they can leave there and go and impact others who have gone through exactly what they've been through. Abortion is not some ethereal thing that takes place outside the church, okay? Statistically, 4 out of every 10 women who have had an abortion were attending church at least once a month at the time. And I always take advantage of the stage I've been given. I will tell you right now, if you're here in person or if you're listening online and you've gone through the pain of an abortion and you don't believe that there's help and forgiveness and redemption, I'm telling you that's a lie. There is help. And we would love to talk with you at Choices. Now, there's no easy way to segue into a political conversation. I've tried. So I'm not even going to try. It's impossible to talk about abortion today without talking about politics. Right? The two have become intrinsically infused together. The problem with politics is that whenever you add politics to something, you get one thing, and that's more politics. What happens when we add politics to education? Do we get better education? Okay. What happened recently? What happens when we add politics to science? Do we get better science? No. Abortion's no different. I'm not going to talk about parties or candidates. What I'm going to tell you is this. Here is the danger of thinking that abortion is a political issue. Abortion, hear me very clearly, is a spiritual issue with political ramifications. When abortion becomes a political football, which it's become, it becomes an abstract, and we strip it from humanity. Remember, at a very minimum, abortion impacts a mother, a father, and a preborn child, right? But when it becomes this thing that we just bounce back and forth as a political debate issue, those people end up getting hurt in the process. And the real problem with politics interfering is that it prohibits life-saving conversation from taking place, and here's what I mean. People that should be engaging in the conversation, they've been conditioned to think that it's political, and they go, I don't want to be involved in that right now, so I'm not going to talk about that. It's political. I see it everywhere. But there's good news. We as the body of believers have the power and the ability to transcend all of that vitriol, that noise, that political back and forth. And I'm going to give you a perfect example of how to do that. There was a study conducted, this was part of a doctoral thesis, where a researcher followed 2 groups of missionaries for 2 years to Thailand. He broke these 2 missionary groups into two categories based on their stated intent. One was the blessers and one was the converters. Okay? The converters were going to go to Thailand with the express intent of converting and saving souls for Jesus. The blessers, on the other hand, they were just going to go and bless anybody they could through word, action, vocational, spiritual, emotional, you name it. They go out for 2 years, they come back. The researcher takes a look at the information, breaks it down again into 2 categories, takes a look at the converters. Their stated intent was to win souls for Christ. He takes a look. After 2 years, they had 1 salvation. He then says, okay, were you able to bless anybody? Takes a look at the data and says, there's no real measurable impact of you having blessed anybody. Now he comes over and he takes a look at the blessers. He says, okay, your stated intent was to bless. Did you bless? He takes a look at the data and he goes, there's absolutely clear indication that you blessed a multitude of people in a multitude of ways. Now, they weren't going to convert, but those blessers, as a result of blessing people, they saw 48 conversions over 2 years. I highlight that as an example because that is what we call love in action. It's becoming the hands and feet of Christ to those around us. That is how we as the body of believers rise above the vitriol and the hate and the rhetoric and the politics. That's how we do it as a body of believers together. And so this leads me to my final segment today, which is, what does success look like? I'll go back to what I said at the beginning. You would think if I had a conversation and I went around the room and I asked everybody, hey, define for me what success looks like in this life space, you'd think we'd all probably be on the same page. The reality is we're not. And I always relate it to, I'm very visual, I always relate it to, let's say we've got a treasure map, right? And you and I are right here, but we need to get over here. The problem is we've got 15 different X marks the spot on the map. That's the problem. We're not all rowing in the same direction. But today I want you to leave here knowing what we at Choices see as success. Love in action. I want to introduce you to a guy named Gustavo. Now, I met Gustavo late last year. He was a university student at ASU, and he had been given a class project. Write a paper or a report on an individual or an organization that had had the most impact on your life. And Gustavo chose Choices Pregnancy Centers. He was able to reach me. He and I connected. I sat down and I interviewed him because I wanted to hear his story. Gustavo was born in central LA, was in gangs all of his life, was in juvenile hall, got his jaw broken, got shot, spent years in prison, changed his life around, and moved to Phoenix, Arizona. He and his girlfriend find themselves pregnant. They end up at Choices Pregnancy Centers. Gustavo was telling me this story, and he says, listen, man, I know what I look like. I'm covered head to toe in tattoos. He said, but when I went to Choices, nobody judged me. Everybody was warm, inviting, welcoming. You guys gave us all this free stuff, and Gustavo goes, I had to ask multiple times, are you sure all this stuff is free? Like, yeah, it's free. He said, you guys gave all these parenting education programs. I took all of them. He said, I want to go back and take them all over again. He says, I want to go back and I want to actually teach the classes. Now, I want to mind you, Gustavo is not a believer, but his life is being fundamentally transformed because we're being blessers, love in action, the hands and feet of Christ to this guy. When I finished my interview with him, I was walking him back to his car, and Gustavo said, I really believe God has me on a journey right now. It's the first time he mentions God in the entire conversation. And I said, Gustavo, he does, man. Lean into where he's taking you right now. Gustavo's job is an Uber driver. He said, every time somebody gets in the car, I share with them my testimony and my story, where I've been and where I'm at today. And he said, I tell them about my beautiful 3-year-old son that's alive today because of the work of Choices. That is what greater love looks like. That is our motto at Choices. It's called greater love. And to put a fine point on it, this is not free love. This is not the Beatles version of love. Greater love is the love of Jesus. That's equal parts truth and that's equal parts grace. That's what we do every single day at Choices. And that is what we see as success. Does every client come in and choose life at Choices? No. But every client comes in and they get greater love. They're treated with dignity, worth, respect, and love. Every time, regardless. And if they go out and they make a choice to have an abortion, guess what they get when they come right back in? Dignity, grace, love, and support, regardless. We don't want you or any church to ever think of Choices as a third-party parachurch organization that's over here doing its thing. Our prayer, our hope, our desire is that you Look at Choices as an extension and ministry of your church so that when you go out the next day, when you go back to work tomorrow, and you meet a coworker or a friend or whomever, and they say, man, it was a really rough weekend. I found out my daughter or my niece or a friend is pregnant unexpectedly. You can simply say to them, that's okay, man. My church has a ministry for that. It's really that simple. I mentioned I've been involved in this space for 10 years. About 5 years ago, it became clear to me, like a light bulb went off, that if we are to see true, systemic, generational change in this big, nebulous thing called abortion and sanctity of human life, that all roads have to lead back to the church. I don't say that because I'm addressing a church today. I say that every day. There is no true, systemic, generational change in this issue without the body of believers coming together. And you may sit here today and you may go, this is great, abortion doesn't impact me at all. You're blessed. But I tell you this because all of us as Christ followers, we have a duty and responsibility to care about those in our communities and to pour into them. And I guarantee you, people inside of your communities, inside of your church have been affected by this issue or will be affected by this issue. And I want you here to leave today having known something you didn't know before. Look at it in a different way and understand how we approach this issue. Now, my final point is this. We don't ever, as Christ followers, water down Scripture. The truth is the truth. We're not doing them any favors if we water it down. We're not doing ourselves any favors. What I will tell you is this. Truth alone without grace will not change lives. Grace alone without truth will not change lives. It's both. And it's all about our tone. Are we coming at it from love? Or are we coming at it with anger, finger pointing, and accusation? Because I'm going to be honest with you. That's how a lot of the world sees us. But these conversations right here begin to transform how we think and feel about the issue. I want to thank Pastor Mike for the opportunity to be here today. I want to thank you for attention. I want to thank you for your support for our organization. Thank you guys very much.
If you have your Bibles, Jeremiah chapter 1, Psalm 139. Thanks for the chip clip. I'm going to use this. Now, I was kind of looking at the resource table. You need to grab this, okay? How many people have you been exposed to? And it tells you if you have had more than one partner, it'll tell you the shocking number of effect that it has on your body, okay? And God did not design, I'm going to say it, don't hate me. He doesn't talk about politics, but I do, okay? And I'll say the word, it's called sex, S-E-X. It's when a man and a woman consummate together in bed. Once you make that decision, you made a choice to possibly have a baby. But if you have more than one partner, you're making a bigger risk because you're vulnerable to STDs, right? You know what that is. If you don't know what that is, ask your neighbor. If your neighbor doesn't know it, smack their head and ask another neighbor. But many of us have fallen into sexual sin, and God did not design sex to be experimented outside of what? Marriage. Seriously, sing that song, MC Hammer in your head. Can't touch this. Tell the woman, tell the man, can't touch this. You know? And I want to encourage you guys, if you look at Jeremiah chapter 1, verse 5, because we have communion today, so I don't want to take up too much time. Seeing that we're talking about abortion and life, there are many, many verses pertaining to life. I just want to touch upon a few verses. In Jeremiah chapter 1, verse 5, and this is when God's calling Jeremiah. Notice what he says in verse 5. Before I formed thee in the belly, I knew thee. Right? And before thou camest forth out of the womb, I sanctified thee, and I ordained thee to be a prophet unto the nations. Now, obviously, this is God speaking to the prophet Jeremiah, but Jeremiah says, oh, I'm but a child, right? Before God called Jeremiah, notice this, I formed thee in the belly. In the animal kingdom, they are not created in the image of God. In the plant kingdom, they are not created in the image of God. There's only one thing that's created in the image of God. That's who? You and I. Some of us more handsome than the other. Some of us prettier than the other. But we are all what? Created in the image of God. He formed you, he sanctified you, and he ordained you. And you got to know that, right? Like I mentioned earlier, I would not be here had my Father, who's now in heaven, who didn't know Jesus Christ, but he knew about life, and he fought for me, not knowing that I would be doing this one day. Leading worship and teaching the Bible and on. And ministry would be in my life, and that's my calling and my lane. But had my mom ended my life, and I can see why. I was like 10 pounds and 20 ounces. And she had a C-section, and she pointed that out to me every time. You did this to me. I don't have a six-pack because it's your fault. You were so big in my belly. You were fat. And I was like, what did I do? It's you and Dad that shacked up. Come on, don't blame me for your, panza, But you see, had my mom went through with that abortion, I'll be in the presence of the Lord, but I wouldn't be able to be here to share the gifts and the talents that God has bestowed upon me. God created each of us, your life, to be formed, sanctified, and ordained for the purpose of God. Your life matters. Now, turn over to Psalm 139. In verse 13 in Psalm 139, it says, for thou hast possessed my reins, thou hast covered me in my mother's womb. Jeremiah says, I have formed thee in the belly, right? Here, the psalmist says in verse 13, you have possessed my reins, thou hast covered me in my mother's womb. Now, those of us that have been, some of us men look like we're pregnant, but you can't get pregnant. Let's get that out of the way. But those of us that have been married and had kids, right? When you get to that third or fifth month, the kid's doing like some, karate or whatever. There's an elbow coming in. They're doing some stretches. They're doing a up dog in your belly, and you're like, what are you doing, kid? You're making me go potty, Stop moving around. And I remember when I used to play guitar when, Ethan was in Lacey's womb, and I could see his hands moving, and I was like, wow. Like us guys could never experience that. Never. No matter what the woke culture says. We can never experience an elbow or a foot moving in our belly, even though it could be the food that you ate last night and you experienced that today. But I could see the joy in Lacey's eyes when she'll say, here, put your hand here. I could see Bruce Lee, right? Whatever, maybe he's a basketball player and you see his hand go like that. Maybe he's a golfer, he's punching you in the gut. I don't know what it is. But you moms have a duty to carry that baby unto the Lord. Because you are a shell, so to speak, for someone in your womb that's been formed by God, sanctified God, and ordained by God to be used for the purpose of God. So in verse 14, notice, I will praise thee, for I am fearfully, wonderfully made. Marvelous are thy works, and my soul knoweth right well. The psalmist says, I will praise thee, knowing the fact that what? I was formed in God. And notice, verse 15, my substance was not hid from thee when I was made in secret and curiously wrought or worked in the lowest parts of the earth. Thine eyes did see my substance, yet being unperfect, or worked out, so to speak. In thy book all my members are written, and in continuance were fashioned, when as yet there was none of them. I want to remind us today, before we partake of communion, that you and I are in the business of serving the Lord, not me, myself, and I. And when you know that God created you, when you know that God sanctified you, when you know that God ordained you, man, you can go full steam ahead in serving the Lord. Like, I know that God saved me from abortion. I know now, as a 21-year-old man, plus 30, that this is the lane and the purpose in my life is to serve him. To be a father, to be the husband, is to serve him, serve them, and that's my lane. Each of us have been formed, sanctified, ordained for something. I don't know what that is for you. Maybe it is to love on your husband or your wife. And you might in your heart right now, why? But I don't want to. Have you seen my husband? Have you seen my wife? Oh. But God might have called you to serve him. Why? Because if there's a greater purpose in that individual, then you're serving him, right? To tie into Marc what he said, Jesus says is more blessed what? Than to give. Than to what? Receive. Are you a giver or a taker? Are you like a Gollum Christian? Mine. Mine. Precious, it's mine. It's my ministry. It's my church. It's my women's and men's and children's and... Is it really yours? You know, God can snap his finger and just have you croak. 10 people died on Tonopah last night, or yesterday afternoon, in a semi crash. I heard it was a bit windy yesterday with a little bit of dust. 10 people lost their lives. Did they want to lose their lives? Probably not. Year that you're born, year that you die, and then there's a 1-inch space. And in that 1-inch space, what is your worth in life to God before he calls you home? I don't know what that is for you. I hope and pray that in Southwest Calvary, we can raise you up and send you out. I'm hoping that in the next 1 year, 5 years, 10 years, we can have a school and we can have a Bible Institute and send men out and women out into the workspace. Because why? Jesus says, the harvest is plentiful, but what? You see, you guys all come to the church, you're like, oh, man, how did that get up there? Man, who put all this together? Laborers. And you see God formed you, sanctified you, ordained you for something.